I'm Carl Arundel, and I have to say I'm delighted to be chairing this next section. I hope you've been having an informed day today. For the bit that I've been here, I've been very informed and very excited to listen to what's been going on the stage. And I think this section should be hopefully just as exciting and interesting. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Martine Brandt and Peter Flannery, who are, for those who don't know, the acclaimed co-writers of the historical drama series The Devil's Whore, which depicts the historical role played by the key protagonists in the English Civil War, in particular honest John Lilburne, Thomas Rainsford, Thomas Cromwell, Edward Sexby, all seen sort of through the eyes of Angelica Fanshawe. I'm delighted to be joined by them in conversation today. Welcome to you both. I'm going to hand over to Peter Flannery, who's just going to introduce a small clip.
Obviously, the reason we're here as non-historians today at this august event, we're interlopers really, because we are very far from being historians. We're dramatists, and therefore we go about our business in a particular way, in a very different way. Just as history is controversial, as it keeps being said, so is drama. Obviously, John Lilburne played a large part in The Devil's Whore, and we would just like to kick the session off by showing a short clip from episode 3, which shows the trial of the 1653 trial of John Lilburne, where he was acquitted by the jury. And this will give you a flavour of it for those of you who haven't seen it at all.
Now, Martine, if I may start with you. When the drama was first released in November 2008, you wrote in The Guardian that there was a frenzy of interest among your daughter's friends at school who could not understand why they were required to study the Russian Revolution and not our Civil War. You said that rigorous academic historians might resist any imaginative invention, but creative reconstruction is the essence of drama. How necessary is that creative invention in the success of Devil's Whore and its sequel, New Worlds?
Well, it's essential to drama, isn't it, Peter?
Well, it is, yeah.
Because, I mean, you asked me earlier why, given that Anne Fanshawe, whose memoirs we have, had inspired the drama, and she was a real character, why we didn't stick with a real character to pivot the drama. And the reason we didn't is that the constraints would have been just too great. I mean, we needed an invented character, a character of our imaginations, but informed by historical events and the tenor of the times, to move through those times, to be the prism through which we could go on that journey. So Angelica had to be everyone, and that's what
I raise this issue because you have had some criticism from sort of historians about your departure from fact, and that the introduction of fiction at the level that you have in this drama wasn't possibly necessary. They say there's enough drama in the real characters.
Well, there's enough drama if you've got, there's enough in it if you've got 25 hours to do it. But when you have to compress and create a dramatic narrative out of some of the bones of history, it's only some of them, because we just take something, like all art, it's a completely selective process where, well, actually so is history. But the telling of history, it's all a collective process, a selective process, you know. But we just don't have a problem with that. In fact, we're necessarily open about it. But given that we had, whatever we had in the end, 4 times 48 minutes, not even 4 hours, we have to tell a story very, very, very swiftly, and we have to take shortcuts. And the biggest shortcut we took was to create a fictional character, Angelica Fanshawe, who we would lead the audience through all of the events and all of the other characters, whether they were real or imaginary. I think all of the others were real, weren't they? Or based as much as possible on, sometimes quite easily on historical. Yeah. But there's a bigger truth
although
we're trying to tell. Yeah.
There is a credit that comes up in one of the episodes at least that says this is the true story of Angelica Fanshawe.
A true account, but that comes directly. That's about your research, though, isn't it? With the Newgate accounts.
Many years ago, and indeed where this story, the idea for the drama came from, was an MPhil thesis I'd written on women criminals in the 17th century, and looking at the Ordinary Newgate's accounts, his reports of the behaviour and the confessions, and indeed the gallows speeches of women who were hanged at Tyburn. And not only did those do they exist in abundance, but they're also their sort of counterparts, because no sooner there was the Ordinary of Newgate, the chaplain of Newgate, trying to make money publishing these criminal biographies, but there were lots of independent hacks who would rush to print stories, but which had all kinds of made up elements to them. And so what we were trying to show, in calling it the Devil's Hall, which she would have been, given that she wasn't, she had not conformed. Any woman who didn't conform was by definition a whore. And so she became known as the Devil's Hall, and the true account of the life and times of Angelica Fanshawe is our nod to that.
Perhaps that leads me to a pressing question that I've had since watching the drama, is the constant appearance of the devil with this long tongue. Could you possibly expand on the significance of the devil's appearance throughout this?
Well, that's Angelica's conscience, because in an early part of the story, Angelica's mother, who's a Roman Catholic, and because Roman Catholics are being persecuted in the 1620s, 30s, she leaves to join a convent in France and abandons her daughter. And Angelica throws down a Bible and says there is no God. And having denied God, she then feels that the devil, she also is coming together.
His visitation.
So what might be interesting, Peter, is just to talk a bit about that devil, and how when you're making a drama, the whole collaborative process of working with production designers and art departments and directors, and how that particular visual of the devil was never quite
your intention.
So there's great prosthetic tongue.
The great prosthetic tongue, I didn't mind. I think I did right. He unfurls a 3-foot long tongue at one point. I didn't quite expect it to have that impact. And I didn't think he was going to come back that often. But the designer, it's a gift to a designer, so the designer suddenly got devils.
Rolls it out every 5 minutes.
It's all over the place. Yeah. We even put great big horned devils on the front of Fanshawe House. When we got to South Africa, saw the set for the first time, we had to get them to take them down. It's like, oh, I'm building a house, I'll put a picture of Jimmy Savile.
Now, Peter, the Daily Telegraph headlined the news of the production of the Channel 4 series with Channel 4 sexes up the Puritans.
Yeah, well, it says more about the Daily Telegraph than anything else. That was written about a year before I finished writing the script, long before we shot it. Was based on, a casual chat with a guy who was looking for a story, and of course I never said anything like that, and he just went out, hired some historians who also can't possibly have watched it because we hadn't made it, who rent the gob, said, well, they're sexing up the Puritans. The program hadn't even finished writing the scripts, never mind shooting it. So it's all made up.
So there's no truth to the suggestion you made that Flannery said a self-proclaimed proclaimed Republican, believes that merging fact with fiction will help debunk the myths surrounding Cromwell and the Puritans.
Well, I might say something like that.
Yeah. But okay, well, you have said that the Americans have realised that there is an awful lot of money in sex and adrenaline in costume, and they are busy ransacking our history in order to turn it into cheap entertainment. Is it fair to say that you've perhaps taken a little bit out of their book or not?
Well, I don't know in what context I might have said anything like that.
Yeah.
But, I think what I was saying was, I don't know what I was referring to, frankly, if I said anything like that. But I don't mind, you know, a bit of sex and a bit of love and romance. There's far more romance and love in Devil's Hall than there is sex. Yeah. But it's true, she does. None of it's gratuitous, and it's, you know, it is all about passion in the end. I mean, yes, one of the things we were both quite interested in saying was the Puritans, you know, this comes back to the whole educational thing, I think, about the way that the English Revolution has been treated and seen and taught to me, but you know, apart from anybody else. What I learned in school was that the Roundheads were boring and wore German military helmets. And never had sex and banned Christmas, whereas the Cavaliers, they were laughing in it, and they all looked like, what's his name, that comedian, you know, yeah, and you know, and they were joyous, you know, and the wrong side lost, and then we had an interregnum, but it's all right because it all got joined up and put back properly, you know, a bit later. So that's what I was taught about the English Revolution, which was never referred to as an English Revolution anyway, but as a civil war that somehow went wrong and the wrong side won. But it's, you know, we got over it in the end, you know, and the king came back and everything was all right. So that's the context in which you sit down to try and create.
But not the context in which this was written.
No.
We did do some research.
No, but you don't.
No. What you're talking about in very, very broad terms is a very badly informed audience.
Yeah.
And I'm not being presumptuous or pretentious about that, because I was one of them when I sat down to start work on this.
Yes.
But it is all part of this sort of refusal to address what happened in the English Revolution. It's a revolution which should be proud of it and its legacy. But a veil has been drawn by the establishment, and it continues to be drawn. The British citizenship test that people who want to know British citizens have to take. There's a huge gap in the history section. They don't treat, they don't ask any questions, they don't mention the Republican period. And when the Home Office was asked why this was the case, they said it's still too much of an uncomfortable memory. It's still too
It's too early to make our minds up.
You were speaking earlier, we were hearing earlier about the burial place of John Milton. Just 2 years ago, I was overwhelmed to discover that the burial place of Thomas Rainsborough in St John's Cemetery in Wapping had been uncovered, an unmarked grave, and there was a special unveiling of a plaque, I think organised by John and some of his colleagues, which I attended. And I found it quite amazing to discover that thousands of levellers wearing their green ribbons had marched through London to Wapping on the day of his funeral, but none of this is recorded or properly marked anywhere. Is there a reason why there's some sort of veil, as you put it, has been drawn across this story? Are they worried there may be an incitement to revolution again?
Somebody said this morning that it was Jeremy Corbyn about history and the importance of history, but there are things that aren't touched on because we might get ideas.
That's also as Victor's history, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, the people who go to unmarked graves, go down silently, tend not to write the history books. But you know, people like Lilburn, has been eloquently spoken of today. You know, they do get written about. They do. Their legacy does continue. It's there. It just goes underground for a little while, and then it's in certain centuries, at certain times, it pops up again. Like, you know, as I said, the liberal Marxist historians took a completely different view of the Levellers and of Cromwell's army, in fact. and this will go on happening. And this is just our tiny part of trying to rehabilitate a part of English history. We don't do it like historians do it, but think of the possible impact you can help create when a young audience, predominantly what we're trying to get with that Channel 4 audience, watches that for 4 weeks. We're not expecting them to, I wouldn't want them to believe it as literal history, and we went out of our way over and over again to say, we are not historians, and you better look this up. But go and look it up. Look at what's been taken away from you in the way because your history's being hidden from you.
And it was all made so palatable because it was a love story. I mean, essentially, it's a love story. Dennis was a love story, but not a love of a man and a woman, or in our case, a woman and several men. Moving up forward. But love for one another, and when we wrote or started to write the sequel, New Worlds, that was our starting point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where did those ideas go? Where did that passion go?
Yeah. 20 years later.
The restoration comes, Charles is back, and it looks as though everybody is living happily ever after.
Yes, because the Merry England myth of history is an even bigger lie than, the Roundheads killed Christmas, like Grinch.
Charles II was the biggest tyrant we've ever had.
Now, but you did say earlier on in our conversation that there were some difficulties in trying to get your narrative across, and that's one of the reasons for having a character like Angelica. But you also had other difficulties. Originally, I understand that there were 12 episodes commissioned to cover the Devil's Hall. That was savagely cut to 4. How did that change?
It took us 15 years to get Devil's Hall on the screen. 15 years from being commissioned.
Yeah, it's been like France by a year.
Yeah.
Right. Special.
Do you understand any reasoning behind the cut? The back was £7 million.
Well, you must be careful. Channel 4 didn't cut anything because it was a BBC project.
Yeah.
And initially they talked about 12-part serial, and we created a 12-part Bible with the outlines of 12 episodes, and that's why we spent a year researching it. Then it all fell apart. As usual, the people who were interested in leave their jobs. Things move on, they're looking for different things, the project's dead. Roll forward 10, 12 years, someone's running Channel 4 and goes, what would you most like to have made? And you go, well, we've only got 2 episodes written, but there's the Devil's Hall, which means an arm and a leg to us, and they go, okay, well, let's do it. Then that shows our bona fides to you because we want to work with you. And so, but we can only put in £5 million. We can only do 4 episodes. It's unlikely to sell abroad. You're probably not going to get co-promotion. Are you willing to have a go at doing it in 4 times 48 minutes? Big intake of breath. We had a really long look at it and thought we can't do all of it, but there is a version of this that we can do, and it's worth having a go at. And if we don't, it's never going to get done. So you have to be pragmatic about it.
And then
it's like if your publisher says you can't have the encyclopedia, but you can have 1 volume. Do you want to have a go at it? And you probably say yes. On the whole, I think that was worth doing. I mean, I wouldn't always say yes to that because sometimes I think you do have to have
to do justice to the topic.
Now we can have a go with that. There's loads of stuff that we miss from it.
Yes, and actually, do you remember, Peter? Even when the BBC were commissioning their 12 episodes, they weren't thinking in terms of Civil War drama. They weren't really interested in doing a Civil War drama. They wanted Angelica as highwayman, didn't they?
Right.
It was more
Now, I did hear mention that the sequel had its problems. I noticed, having watched The Devil's Hall, that there would seem to be no sort of natural link to the so-called sequel. In fact, I just came across it by accident. Why was that?
Again, it's because there were new incumbents in the drama department at Channel 4, so the the commissioning editor who was keen to do a sequel to Devil's Hall because it had been a big success. I mean, at the time, it was the most watched drama, wasn't it?
Yeah, until Indian Summers came out, it was their biggest drama for 25 years.
Yeah. So they were thrilled with it. But then it was musical chairs, everything changed. So we started work on Angelica's continuing story, sort of what happened to Angelica in the Restoration, what happened to those radical ideas, and we merrily wrote 4 episodes based on that, and then with an idea to looking at their travelling across to America, and the new people at Channel 4 just didn't.
They wouldn't do it unless the first 4 episodes would encompass that trip to America, because it had to sell to America, and that's what would make it different from the Devil's Hall. And above all, they wanted it to be different to the Devil's Hall because they look like piggybackers. If they come in and have a sequel,
Lift to BBC.
You know, what is that? What is that to do? What is that except naked careerism?
Now,
are there any journalists here?
Tell me, why was it filmed in South Africa?
Money, just money.
There weren't quality locations all over Britain.
There are,
yeah.
It was too expensive, there weren't the tax breaks. Gordon Brown, wasn't it Gordon Brown?
Yeah, it was tax breaks. Also, really cheap labour in South Africa. I don't know if you know that.
To the extent that we're in South Africa, we were able to make every single costume.
Every costume was made.
On New Worlds, we filmed it here, and we only made 1 costume. Everything else was rented, and it looked it. I mean, it didn't have the. It had a pattern that it should have had. But the only costume was Beth's birthday dress, wasn't it? That was the only one. And they made a really big.
We were really worried about South Africa that it would never look anything like England. In fact, it passes a lot of the time. And one thing it gave you, which I loved actually, was these massive skies. And every time I see those massive skies on the Devil's Hall, I think there's something about that doesn't quite look like the England that I live in, and I quite like the otherness of that. You know, that who knows what the skies look like in 16th century.
Yeah, well.
Perhaps they did look a bit grand, perhaps there was a little bit more, perhaps the light was a little bit.
And it's always great to have a great imagination, isn't it? Yeah. But tell me, to go back.
You take all the actors out.
Yeah.
If you look at some of the crowd scenes, it doesn't half look like the Boer War. You know.
Now to go back, I mean, we're here to celebrate the anniversary of Lilburn. You described Lilburn as burningly revolutionary at the time and bitingly relevant today. How do you see that?
This is the book.
You should have said that.
Well, for all the reasons that everybody's outlined this morning, the changes he forged, and which we should mention is that he with that he's calling for a chamber pot in court, which
was that invention or did that?
That really happened. And as a result of that precedent, he won comfort state breaks for everyone hereafter. So yes, I mean, we just wish that within the drama that we had within the Devil's Hall, we could have shown much more of that.
He's a real gift to dramatists, certainly, Martin, because there's no shortage of fabulously interesting, revolutionary people in that story. But what would our story have been without Lilburn constantly getting on the wrong side of everybody, constantly falling out with all his mates, one by one?
But I understood you didn't have much on a personal level of information about him. Well, it was all sort of court extracts, things like that.
Yeah.
But you can extrapolate it, and you hear his voice. That's the marvelous thing. And also Elizabeth. Elizabeth is silent, but we know that fantastically strong and supportive, and that's why Maxine, and that's why she really is the inspiration for Angelica's political awakening. We can have Angelica, I mean, we took all kinds of images that you know, there's enough of a truth in there. So, for example, with Elizabeth, we have her walking to Oxford, to Fanshawe House, to beg for Angelica and Harry mainly, to intercede and help Lilburn. And she was pregnant. She didn't walk. But she did right. She made that right.
But history also shows that apparently women played a big role in this process. I mean, apparently 800 women marched to Parliament to demand the release of Overton and Lilburn. Yes. So to some degree, was that an influence in the two big female characters in your drama?
Yes, and because everything's politics. You know, if you can't put bread in the mouths of your children, then you are politicised. But somebody like Angelica, that's on the practical side of things. Angelica is intellectually awakened. So when we have Elizabeth, there's no doubt that she had a hand in writing Lilburn's.
I think what this also shows on another level is that the relationship that will always be between history drama, television drama, theatrical history, and history that historians do. That is, we will always follow them. As research gets done, if research gets done that shows there's a massively more involvement of women in that, for instance. If we ever were to go to that again, we would use that more. You know, we probably would write the scene where the 800 women storm Parliament. You know, so.
But that's what we were doing in that scene. But Elizabeth
we were, yeah. She stormed.
That was the shorthand because
But we don't. It's historians who make history up. We don't make history up. We make dramas up based on what we read of a story that's worked.
We borrow.
We borrow. Yeah, it's all borrowed clothes, you know, and that's why what we do isn't, in many ways, isn't as important as what historians do, but it does reach a massive audience. And if we're behaving ourselves, and you might want to ask us whether we are or not, and if we're being honest and if we're trying our best to live within, you know, what we believe might be true, which is all I think historians are doing as well. But I know they're digging more than we are. But we're borrowing their ideas and their research, trying to turn it into something that might reach a popular audience that in turn may be interested enough to find out more about our history.
So is that your
saying
right?
Once again, you know, that this was important to us, that we felt that the history had been mistold over a long period of time.
So was that your drive? Were you wanting to debunk myths, to incite interest in this historical topic, or were you interested in good drama or combination?
Well, incite interest.
To
tell a story, to dramatise a wonderful story in as
untold stories. Well, it's important, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to write about the Tudors, do you? I mean, it's not like it's not like we don't know.
Well, Martina, I know you. When I mentioned these comments, you think, "Oh, it's that blog again." You just said, but I had a reason to visit the British Library just last week. I had a meeting there. Noted that they were just about to open a new exhibition on the Magna Carta. Now you wrote that the sign at Runnymede declares the site to be the birthplace of modern democracy. Wrong, you said. Modern democracy was born in the blood, smoke and stench of the English civil wars and in the struggle of those men like John Lilburn, whose conviction and sacrifice forged the liberties we know today and so readily take for granted. Why are the actions of and is the Magna Carta less important?
Well, yeah. Well, in the sense that I don't think those nobles cared whether the poorest king had a stake in the kingdom as much as the greatest king. And,
No, it's a basic difference, I think. I don't know. I don't know what drama I would write about. I can't.
Shakespeare.
Shakespeare. Yeah, Shakespeare.
Now, Peter, you've been highly acclaimed for your landmark production of Our Friends in the North. Regarded as one of the most successful BBC television dramas of the 1990s.
Yeah, they've never done anything since.
The British Film Institute said it was in the 100th greatest British television dramas made in the 20th century.
Yeah, it's quite high, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, what is particularly noticeable about it is that it constantly references real political and social events, general elections, police, local government corruptions, and so on, the miners' strike. You once joked that Our Friends in the North was a history of British post-war housing.
Yeah, I tried to sell it to
To what degree should drama reflect gritty reality of our political and social history? Are you after the Ken Loach school of reality?
Well, I wish, Ken Loach is a master and I'm not, but I think we're both trying to tell a kind of untold working class history, and I'm certainly interested in that. The interesting link for me between Our Friends in the North and what came later, The Devil's War, is that it's again that mix of real people and fictitious people. Maybe in Our Friends in the North it's fictitious people with dressed up real people, but all against the real backdrop of what actually happened. I mean, that was easier for me to figure out because I lived through most of it. Whereas,
you were born in Jarrow.
I was born in Jarrow.
With that start.
That was quite a good start. And my grandfather marched and all of that sort of thing. Yeah. So all of that working class history was kind of at my fingertips, but not recognised by the people who had lived it. I mean, I wrote Our Friends in the North because I was more interested in the political process and less cynical about it, actually, than my parents were. And that struck me as being odd. And when I asked them why they were cynical about the political process, they talked about corruption a lot, and that was what led me to start asking those questions. So I rang up T. Dan Smith and asked him whether he thought there was a story to be told, and of course he said, there is a play here of Shakespearean proportion. But I think Dan knew who the hero was going to be, It didn't quite work out like that.
Now, Martine, your sequel to The Devil's War, The New World, takes us to follow the lives of the brave Englishmen and women who strove for those puritanical ideals, subsequently crushed by Charles II. You said brutally crushed by him in 1660 when the monarchy was restored and they hadn't just disappeared. You wanted to tell that story. How do you, if I may ask this, reconcile the noble libertarian ideals apparently held by the English settlers with their brutal annihilation and ethnic cleansing of the population of Native Americans? I mean, if you just need to read Dean Brown's Bury My Heart, a Wounded Knee, to see the extent of the brutality at their hands. How do you reconcile these high liberal values with those actions?
Those Puritans who went to the New World went to build a city on the hill. They went as God's chosen people. They left these shores and they thought they were being drawn to a place where they would be exceptional. And so chosen. So any interruption in that, and the natives, they got on with them to begin with, the Native Americans, but then they simply got in the way, and they needed to expand, and they just wiped them out progressively.
Yes, progressively. But you said needed to expand. It all sounds very soft, but it was very much a brutal process, wasn't it? I mean, apart from systematically marginalisation. Do you think, I mean, you said about being the chosen ones, do you think there was a general belief that the natives were not real human beings or were inferior?
That's explicit.
Yeah. I mean, at first they tried to convert them and they put them into what they called praying villages. and herded them into these villages where they could be evangelized and controlled. That those who stood up to them, they simply wiped out.
And do you think
we show that, or we try to show that again? It's we try and tell epic story.
The word, in the end, it becomes an issue of land and property. They're quite happy up to a point to share the land with the indigenous natives, but once there's pressure on and they need that land, boy, do they come up with really convincing reasons why the red man has to go. They've got no souls, they don't understand about property anyway, they're lazy, they waste the land, they don't do anything with it. They kept saying to it, you've got to be productive. The Indians don't do anything. They fish, they file a barrel all day, they don't build universities or anything like that. It needs the white man to come and do that.
The Puritans thought any kind of idleness, and idleness is all recreation.
And that was justification.
Sitting with your children,
yeah. So, Devil's Law, New World, that to some extent was quite a departure, especially for you, Peter, from the sort of contemporary themes you've worked on in the past. I think you've said that both productions are about political change and how it is brought about. Is that the fundamental connection?
Yes, I think it's about how we organise ourselves, with limited resources. I also think it's about how we bind together to make political change, to create fairer, juster societies in which we can all share. I mean, that's the fundamental thing that's going on in all of them, really, and all of them asking on a higher level. And really, I've learned this question from Martine, which is how do we live a good life? How do we? What's the nature of love? One human being for another. How do we share? How do we live a good life? What is a good life? And at the same time, you're asking how do we divide up these resources and how can we get rid of these fuckers who run the country?
Not parallels, but the resonances from that echo through history. So, for example, habeas corpus. John Milburn used habeas corpus more times than anybody else in history. Cromwell got his number. Cromwell shunted him off to Jersey, to Mount Orgueil, where habeas corpus didn't run. If that's not the first Guantanamo Bay, it was extraordinary, wasn't it? Yeah. You see these things just playing out, and that's why we need to know, we need to tell these stories.
So, how would you ideally like to see a response to the dramas that you've created? What would you like to see happen next on these particular issues? I mean, you see...
I would just love that my daughters and all their friends, and my daughters can now vote, that they'll all be racing to vote in the election, to feel that they can change their world. Because you have to feel you can change the world. That's what we will hope.
I'm not so keen on elective democracy myself. I don't think it really gets us very far. And I haven't voted since 1974. I haven't voted since 1974. I've lived in a succession of highly Tory places where it's completely pointless. What's the point of me voting against Winston Churchill? When I'm a student. So I'm not so keen on what I see happening.
So what is the alternative?
Well, I haven't got one.
Is it to influence change through film?
Well, that is one. If you're lucky to have a job in which you can have a voice and speak for change, then that is a form of being a part of a democracy. I do believe in democracy, and I just don't think what we have delivers very much of it. That's all. We had a chance to vote for proportional representation so that everybody's vote would count, and people voted against it.
Well,
I was the wrong sort, I know.
So where to now? Have you got any hopeful projects up your sleeves, both of you? Are we expecting another series on the same theme, or potentially another theme which would be insightful and uplifting?
Well, we were quite bruised by the past experience, trying to tell the story of New Worlds was so, in the hands of the broadcasters, just became so diminished, didn't it? And the story became diminished because of budgetary and time concerns and politics.
It's sort of just a bit of a mess, really.
So you have to grow a thick skin in order to enter to that domain
Well,
again.
you just lose the trust that you can ever tell the story you want to tell because it becomes so chiseled away.
Yeah, it's boring, isn't it?
I mean, yeah.
No, I've been asked to do, I've got a little idea for it's essentially another Our Friends in the North, 8, 9, 10 parts. BBC say they want it, they'll never do it.
And why is that? Because of money? Is that because of politics?
Because they probably won't understand.
They won't get it. They think they get it, but they won't get it. Look, you know, I spent 14 years trying to get Our Friends in the North made, and it was easy, you know, in the sense that I was in my 30s, and I could say to the guys who were running it, I'll just wait for you to die. Because they were 60 and I was 30, but I'm 60. I'm 60 and they're 30. They're waiting for me to die.
But also, Peter, Our Friends in the North started as a play.
It started as a play.
So that was something
So
that in the play they could get their hands
They
on.
could get their hands
You know, it's terribly hard to get an original idea made. Everybody wants the book or the play or that's it. They want the intellectual property that they can get their heads around because they are bears of very little imagination.
And
then
am I allowed to mention the
quickly.
Fire of London? Am I allowed to mention it? is that dead in the water?
The story hangs there, but whether we'll ever...
It's a massive story, largely invented by, worked on by Martine, because I was busy off doing something else. It was the story of the Fire of London, but basically the rebuilding of London.
And that would be quite different from the one we've seen.
Yeah.
This would deal with Robert Hooke.
It's called Pandemonium, and it's a wonderful story, but it needs massive resources to be devoted to it, and it also would need us to believe that it's worth the effort anymore, and I'm not sure I believe that anymore.
I mean, it is timely because it's about, the rebuild, it's mainly about the rebuilding of London and what that needed. It's housing.
It's about post-war public housing policy.
But banking, how banking
starts, how the city started, the first taxes were raised. I mean, it's round here, isn't it? I don't know what that.
But there's a love story.
Oh, of course.
Oh, right, there has to be a love story.
A young Muslim who comes to the Royal Society with her
The Muslim started the fire.
No. It's not a bad idea. It gets us co-production money in America.
Well, look, on that note, Martina Brent and Peter Flattery, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.